Welcome to the Sober by Design podcast, where we explore the many pathways to recovery and a better life through conversations with a wide array of guests. Whether you're sober curious, in recovery, or simply looking to improve your mental health and well-being, this podcast will have something for you. Each week, we sit down with inspiring guests from all walks of life who share their personal stories of struggle and triumph, offering valuable insights and practical advice on how to design a life worth living. From addiction and mental health to spirituality and creativity, we cover a wide range of topics that are relevant to anyone seeking to live a more fulfilling and authentic life. So join us on this journey of discovery, growth, and transformation, and start designing a new life. All right, everybody, welcome to the Sober by Design podcast. Today we're here with Nanci Adair. Nanci is a podcaster as well as a life coach, and she focuses on recovering artists. Nanci, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Corey. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, great. I'm excited to have you here. There's a lot that you just told me in our quick pre-interview, and I've been following you on Instagram. So if you could just give the listeners kind of a background on where your life started and how you sort of found yourselves with substance issues.
So interesting to hear you say where your life started, because I think immediately that my life really started with recovery. However, there is a backstory, like there is for everyone. And I grew up in a very well-to-do household that was what we call the looking good syndrome, looking good on the outside and totally effed on the inside. And my dad was market research director for General Foods and an alcoholic. My mom was salutatorian from Barnard, her class at Barnard, in chemistry and physics, and was a drug addict and alcoholic who said that she drank just to keep her husband company, my dad. And, I lost my mom when I was 16 years old. She died of a massive heart attack. And I found in her purse these drugs that she could make in the laboratory. So, I consider us, our family, the poster family for dysfunctional families when as I became an adult. And truthfully, the only people that have survived in my family are those of us that are in recovery. And that's my brother, my sister, and myself. And we all have, my brother was the first one to come into AA. I think it's 46 years ago now.
Wow.
I'm 42 years sober.
Wow. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of shared recovery in your family. That's awesome. So you're Northeast. You are a Northeast person, Barnard, and that's where
And
you
I
kind of grew
live
up.
in Portland, Maine. So.
All right, yeah, I knew that. And Portland is maybe my favorite city in the world. So I knew
It's
that.
my favorite.
It's just great. It's great. So you lost your mom when you're 16, so that's a tough place to be as a teenager. That had to send you down some path. Was it soon after, or were you already active using at that point?
I was already actively using. I started smoking pot, not on any regular basis, but I started at age 9.
9, okay.
And, I was drinking, oh my God, I think it was Boone Farms wine or something, really cheap, awful stuff. And I never liked drinking wine. I became a tequila drinker. That was the
Okay.
alcohol that was my real downfall. And I would drink like 10, 12 shots of tequila at a time. This is now as a older teen. And, I went to, it's quite the story because I dropped out of high school at 16, not long after my mom passed. And then I went to college at age 17.
Okay. So you got like a GED and then went on to college.
I did. I moved out of my house. Remember, my dad was alcoholic, so I moved out at 16 to Vermont, from Connecticut to Vermont, went to community college at night and took my GED. And then on my dad's dime, because I was so angry at him, I came back to live with him in the summer, right before I turned 17.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was right before I turned 18. Anyway, I applied to 10 colleges after getting accepted into one at early admission. And then my dad said, I don't want you to go. It was to the University of Redlands out in California.
Okay.
He wanted me to stay on the East Coast. And so I went to a very highfalutin college guidance counselor, and I think it cost $500 a pop, and we're talking 1973, 74, to make a college application. And I did that 10 times just because I was angry at my dad.
Mm-hmm.
And I got accepted into all 10 schools, and then chose the school that I wanted to go to that was by the beach.
It's a good choice.
Making really good choices. And, I drank my way through college, and still managed to graduate and from one school for 4 years.
That's pretty impressive, actually, because a lot of people, I found myself, that's when my drinking started, was in college, and, it really threw me off kilter. So, it did not take just 4 years. The first 2 years of college were kind of a disaster. And then it kind of clicked in a little bit. So that's a pretty good, thing that you got out in 4 years. After those 4 years, where did you find yourself?
Let's see. I moved up here to Maine from where I went to college in New York, and I think I lived initially maybe with my sister, or I was living with my sister during college breaks. My dad passed when I was 24, and I remember at that time I had my first house already, and I was married. I married right out of college. I was 19 when I got married the first time.
Okay.
It was actually my second marriage when my dad died at 24. So, yeah.
So you had a lot going on early in life.
Yeah, and I quit drinking at 24.
And that, yeah.
Because of my dad's death, I was notified that he had died, and my boss at the time, was away at a conference where I was speaking, and my boss came to my hotel room and asked if I needed anything. Someone had informed him, and I said, yeah, bring me a bottle of tequila. That's exactly what I asked for. And luckily, my sister had arrived before my boss came back with the liquor.
Uh-huh.
And we drove to my brother's in Connecticut to go to the funeral. My brother was already in AA. And I saw it. I saw all these people gathering around him. I saw his apartment filled with flowers and cards, and I saw him hugging people. I went to a couple of meetings with him, and I sat in the back, and I didn't say anything, and I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want anyone to talk to me. I had about a 10-foot wall all around me.
Sure.
And but I saw what I saw. I saw that there was a community that he was part of, and I think part of me wanted that.
It's a huge part of AA is the community. That is something that I think is really, important in recovery. And you listen to, different authors talk, and, even scientists, and it's like that connection is, what do they say? Connection is the opposite of addiction, or something to that effect, right? And you really get it there if you allow it, I think is the trick, right? And so many people early on in their journey don't allow that connection to happen. But as soon as they do, I think that's when things start to happen in the room for them. I know that was the case for me early on. the first couple of attempts, I did not allow it. And then I think once I kind of let the voices in, something started to happen. So you were seeing that from your brother, and it's like, wow, that's really nice. Look at all that support he has from these people, and I think we all crave that. I think every human craves that, and we have less and less of it these days. So there's very few places to get it. Um, you know, some people pay for it, right? I was listening to somebody talk, I forget on whose podcast, but they were talking about the idea of like the gyms, like Soul Cycle and all these types of gyms. It's like people, yeah, they pay for the exercise, but they're really paying for that community of
Mm.
the whole idea. And it gives them like a church or an AA, or it gives them something that, some people are finding for free out there in the world. And it's, you know, that's what you saw that day was community. So it must have had a huge impact on the rest of your life, right? And you still go to AA? Is that
I do not
no?
actually. I am a recovering food addict,
Okay.
and I am very involved in a food addicts in recovery 12-step program,
Okay.
which is referred to as the Navy SEALs of 12 steps, because there are a lot of what some would say are rigid, but it's what's necessary to have recovery around food addiction, because you have to eat every day.
Yes.
Then there has to be some definition of what we call abstinence. And for me, that's 3 weighed and measured meals every day with no sugar, no flour, and nothing in between those meals.
Wow. That is rigid.
Been doing that for 22 years, and I go to 3 meetings a week, and I work the steps, and I have a sponsor, and I sponsor other people, and do service, and that's what becomes a recovery base. It's what I call a foundation to recovery,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
of those tools in place. And that includes daily meditation or quiet time and
Okay.
reflection.
I don't know much about food addiction, but I think I mentioned earlier, I did say to somebody, I think it's the hardest, probably the hardest thing to recover from, because you do have to eat to survive, right? It's sort of the only harder one would be like water. I don't know what else there could be that would be harder, right? And
Well, you did mention, Corey, the sex and love addiction. And I don't think of it necessarily in those terms as much as what's coming out nowadays or more popularized is the attachment theory.
mhm,
And for me, that is what's underneath all addiction, is this dependency.
right.
So that's really getting to the core of it. And I think what makes food or sex addiction difficult is because there is a healthy use of food, and there's a healthy sexual relationship within your partnerships,
Hmm.
right? I
Hmm.
mean,
Yeah.
that's good for you and your soul.
It's the idea of regulating your inside feelings with something from the outside, right? That's the basics of it is, if you're using anything external to regulate your insides, it's a problem, right? I know when I'm misusing sugar, I could tell you like, hey, I'm overeating ice cream this week because I'm having a rough week. Not, I can also normally stop that pretty quick, right? It's not something that persists for me. But I can see where it's could be something that is constant. My question to you in that group is, and that because I just don't know anything about it. Are you only dealing with people who eat too much, or are there people who eat too little? Is it just overall sort of just issues around food?
Absolutely. It's overall, it's, people that have been bulimic for, you know, a year, 10 years, people that are under eaters or anorexic, and people that are overeaters or binge eaters, or what's called grazers, that just eat all the time.
Yeah.
And for me, I remember in AA talking to people about being out of control with food, because I was a binge eater and I'd eat large volumes of food. One time, I I don't know what possessed me to try and count the calories of a single binge. And those binges usually lasted 20 minutes, half an hour.
Uh-huh.
And I measured, for instance, I had several candy bars, but I also was always trying to eat healthy. So I'd try the health food power bar type of nutrition bar
Sure.
rather than candy bar. Or I remember in that binge, I was also had 1 pint of diabetic ice cream. And those things, the Tiger Power Bar and the diabetic ice cream, had calorie counts on them. So I just multiplied that by the other pint of ice cream and the other multiple candy bars. And it was 9,000 calories
Wow.
that I had consumed in less than half an hour. And
That's
when you think about that, the denial that I was in was I was only binging maybe twice a week at that time. It wasn't daily.
hmm
And I couldn't understand why I wasn't losing weight because I was always on a diet. Well, if you're eating 9,000 calories in a single sitting, that is several days worth of food for a normal eater.
It is, and if you're not then burning it or using it, right, it becomes sort of just additive to it. And it's also just it is the same thing as binge drinking, right? It's that, that idea of like, okay, I don't do it a lot, but when I do it, I really do it. And both of those things can be super destructive, right? I'll hear
Well, I heard someone in the AA group say to me one time, you can't get high off of donuts, and I'm like, yeah, but I can get into a car accident because I was eating and driving.
yeah,
I can get arrested because I was stealing food. At one time I had this big coat with, the fur around the hood to keep warm in Maine,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I had cut out the pockets of this coat so that I could steal in a grocery store and fill the bottom of the coat with food. And I got caught
Yeah.
and arrested and humiliated because the arresting officer put me in handcuffs and took me out through the front of the store and shoved me in the back of the police car, took me down to the police station, and in the elevator said to another cop, don't stand too close to her, she's got sticky fingers. When we were filling out the paperwork, they ask you your height and weight, and you
Yeah.
said, well, I'm sure you lied on your license about that. Yeah.
Yeah, people will underplay the food thing, but like to say that you can't get high on donuts, sure, that's a true statement. But you could be using them again, like I'm open and honest. If I'm having a rough day, I'll have ice cream, I'll have donut, whatever. It soothes me, right? I know what I'm doing. I'm making a choice in that moment to use food to help me feel better. Um, but like if you do that all the time, you are having an effect on your health. And you can't ignore that, right? Sugar, that type of sugar has an effect long term on how you feel. If I eat like that for extended periods of time, I feel it in my joints. I am sluggish, my sleep is disrupted. There are effects from that. So, for somebody to minimize it is it's just not fair, I don't think. I don't like that attitude of like, well, that's not as bad as what I do, and that's where we get into trouble with people in who are still active, right? Because then they can kind of go like, yeah, I'm not as bad as that person and not as bad as that person, right? And then they can kind of keep using it. It's an out for them.
One of the things that I find fascinating with all the people I work with is how what we turn to for soothing can be so self-destructive.
Yeah.
And even now, like I'll have a really rough day or a long day, and I'm totally into binge watching some series on Netflix, and I'll take it to bed with me.
Yeah.
And just the way I would with drugs, alcohol, or food, and take it to bed with me, and literally, and then fall asleep an hour or two later. Then is my regular routine, and I wake up in the morning and I'm just not ready to go.
Yeah.
And I might miss my morning yoga or quiet time, and my whole day doesn't work as smoothly. And these are the things that I continue to turn to in times of stress to take the edge off. And I think that there's healthy ways to decompress, and yet most of us turn to the unhealthy ways thinking that that's going to do something for us.
Yeah. Some of it too is probably, how easy is it to just pop in and, pop on Netflix and start that, episode rather than, maybe do an extra yoga session, right? Like that is work and people avoid that and they don't see it as the relaxing thing. They see it as, okay, that's just going to add to this day. So I understand sort of the thought process there. And listen,
Mm-hmm.
I've watched tons of Netflix shows. It is or just shows in general. I mean, it is one of my vices. One of my, between that and sugar, I think, I've kind of tried to slow down on social media, but another one, right, that people can easily fall into, just scrolling and, that feedback loop that you get is great on those tools. We do have a culture right now of that easy gratification. So, you're going to see more people using those tools. Again, is Netflix the worst thing? I don't know. But if we're doing it all day, yes. So it's like,
Right.
it's that balance. I think finding balance is super important. And I'm sure that you do probably better than a lot of people out there, you know.
Well, and all I want is the efficacy of it. Like I want to turn to things that soothe me, that work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's one of the things that I say on all my Psychology Today, listing, is that I have never met an addict or an alcoholic with an alcohol or drug addiction problem. What I've met is hundreds of people with a solution that's no longer working,
That's true. That's true.
because we are exceptionally bright people, if I do say so myself, and the reason why we use drugs, food, sex, alcohol is because it works.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it worked for me for a little bit, right? And it worked
Well,
for
it
yeah,
doesn't.
it worked till it didn't. And then then you try to find something else and the problem normally is it doesn't if you're in active addiction, the next thing probably isn't any better for you. Right? You're not making an intelligent choice in that moment, right? You're going from, you know, like in your case, you said wine to tequila, and then tequila could have gone somewhere else, and then you find yourself on pills or whatever the case is, and that progression could be really dangerous. Um, you know, the progression that you would like to see would be from alcohol to maybe walking, or and then from walking into working out, and then working out to getting hooked on marathons or something like that. But that isn't the typical progression. So when you work with your client, you had mentioned you do life coaching, and you like to focus specifically with artists. Is that correct?
Well, artists in recovery are what I call my, upper echelon, the people that I really love working with.
Okay. So they're the top of the pyramid, you know?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, and artists, you know, I've known quite a few, and a lot of them do tend to be, you know, people who are very, sensitive, emotional. I do find a lot of them tend to tend towards, using substances, if you just had to play pure numbers, right? It was like I find that to be the case. Some of it probably is lifestyle. Musicians are in clubs late, and comedians and all these people are always kind of around substances. Unfortunately, it is in a world where healthy habits are pushed. So I think that's really awesome. Um, do you think that there's anything specific that you do for those clients versus your normal clients that's different?
Is it different? I don't know that anything I do for them is different. it's more engaging.
Hmm.
I think that what you said earlier on about connection being the opposite of addiction, I think connection through our creativity,
Okay.
and connection to the creator, or where does creativity come from? I see it as a very spiritual process.
Okay. And you're
So,
you're an artist too then?
yes.
Okay. So you have this bond between, the two sides, right? So you're like, hey, I'm doing this over here and I'm in recovery and this is the way I do it. You could do it this way too. And so you're kind of, you know, have a
Yeah, I'm
through
not
line.
sure that I make it that personal, if like I do it this way,
Okay.
because when I say that I work with artists in recovery, I'm working with musicians and singer-songwriters and writers and fine artists. And I'm a fiber artist, a quilter,
Hmm.
and I'm an illustrator. So those are the expressions that I have that are creative.
Okay. It's just hard because it is so, the more I think about it, it's just so celebrated, right? You just said authors. Like, so, you think of like Bukowski, right? And like that whole idea of, you write better. And, people will say Stephen King's books were always better when he was in active addiction. I don't believe that fully, right? I think that they were different. I don't know that they're better, right? And then you have musicians, you have, the Amy Winehouses of the world, and, you know, and any number of other artists that you could think of that kind of tended towards using and then creating this magical art. And then, you take it, I think sometimes people fear if you take that away that they lose something. um,
Right. Well, that's the myth,
yes.
right? That the creative expression is a result of using, rather than what any, I think 100% of the artists that I've worked with have discovered that they are more creative, clean and sober.
I tend to agree. Knowing some artists that have sort of found their path in recovery. Some are very public about it, but like, Dave Attell, comedian, much better now, much clearer head, and he's writing is like popping, and musicians. And then there's all the actors that, are very open about their recovery, like somebody like Bradley Cooper. Like, would he be as good of an actor if he was, you know, still drinking? I don't think so. That's just a guess. Um, so it is an interesting subset of people to work with.
Well, we know one thing, they wouldn't be all dying young
Right.
before their time.
Right. And that's like the Amy Winehouse story, right? Like such a vibrant career and so tangled in the world of drugs. And, you hate to see that. Or, Mac Miller who OD'd, and all these people who had these huge futures and they were so creative and so smart and but so tied to this world of drugs and alcohol, and they couldn't quite get fully out of it. They would try, but something was stopping them. And, I would hate to think that they thought they needed that as like part of their toolbox to be good at their art. Um, that,
One story that came to my mind, Corey, and I don't know if I've ever said this publicly, at least before, is that when I stopped drinking, I stopped drawing for a period of, I think, about 5 years. And a therapist I was working with suggested I must have started again because I said that I was unable to do my art and not then binge eat.
mm,
Like, it was just stirring that up in me. And he suggested just the opposite. He suggested that I start a pictorial journal. And whenever I felt like binge eating addictively, that I pick up my journal and draw. And I had one of these black illustrator notebooks, that black leather on the outside. And I remember that I opened that to be my pictorial journal. and I drew one drawing, and it was of a long banquet table, like in a castle. And it had a princess at one end of the table, and then a line of birthday cakes with all the candles alit. And I wrote a caption underneath it that said, "None of the other princesses could come to her birthday party, but they all sent cake."
Oh,
And that was the only picture I drew in that journal. And I didn't keep the journal either, because I think it'd be really precious
to
today.
have it now. Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
You should
it
redraw it.
just how much I felt sorry for myself, and
Yeah,
and that cake was the answer.
sure. How long did you struggle with the food issues?
Pretty much all my life. Like, I was a very overweight young teen at puberty. Prior from like 9 to 12, I was very skinny
Mm-hmm.
and very tomboyish and climbed a lot of trees. And people were worried about that I wouldn't eat enough.
Okay.
And I was very picky about my eating, which is something that I look back on now as a recovering food addict and wonder if that wasn't just part of something going on, a relationship with food that was already off balance
Hmm.
way back then. By the time I went to college, I weighed 172 pounds, and I'm small. I'm, 5'3", and I weigh maybe 120 today, or in
Mm-hmm.
the high teens. And at my highest weight, I weighed 189 pounds, that I weighed on a scale. I stopped weighing myself at that point and probably went over the 200 mark, and I didn't look. And I had the attitude that if you don't look and you don't see, it's not happening.
Sure.
So,
Well, and then did so did you finally get control of it through your 12-step group? Is that what led to the control, or was there something prior to that and then you joined that group?
at the same time as I went into AA at 24 years of age, I started going to OA, Overeaters Anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
And that helped me more control my food. I don't feel like I really got the recovery around food addiction. And it helped me control it, and my weight came down to like 145, just in that range.
Yeah.
And then I fully came to this place of surrender when I came into FA, and it was fairly new, and it was an offshoot of OA. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if many of the listeners know that history of the program. And out of Massachusetts, they started their own FA faction of
Okay.
OA that was more structured, and therefore more helpful for the people that were really at the, we call ourselves gutter drunks with food.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't even know if we, in my area, I think we might have some OA meetings. I don't know if we have FA at the
Where are you,
we're
Corey?
in New Jersey, northern Jersey. I mean, it might be closer to the city, but where I am is pretty rural. So I live out in western Jersey. It's very rural. We have a good AA presence. NA is picking up. We have some Al-Anon, but like it's slow to get some of these other newer type meetings.
It's one of the best things that has come out of this global pandemic, is how many meetings went online, and that there are FA meetings all over the world, accessible to anyone, any place.
Yes.
And all the other resources. I have clients that are not willing or interested in going to a 12-step program, and they're finding support through podcasts like yours and mine, and Instagram following, and TikTok. And it's amazing what resources are out there for us all now, and completely anonymous.
Yeah. I mean, it was a huge thing. I do some recovery coaching part time on the side through an organization, and you know when the pandemic hit, it all went virtual. right? So everything went virtual. So meeting with the patients went virtual, and then the resources had to adjust. So all of a sudden it was, there were no more AA meetings. And as soon as they started to come online, it became much easier to talk to people because some people are, in our world are limited by resources. So transportation, right? Access, some people don't like leaving their home. Some people have anxiety issues. So all of a sudden, like those online tools became super useful fast. You could refer people to AA, SMART, a Noble Step meeting, refuge recovery, and it was all times, nobody had any excuse anymore. It wasn't like, yeah, I got to work from 8 to 5, so I can't do it. It's like, well, you got 5 to 11,
The UK meeting time, right?
Yeah. So that was awesome. And, by us, we've managed to keep some of those um, meetings hybrid. So, people who do want that in person are getting it, which I think is great. Again, talking about connection, you know, that there is something in those rooms that happens besides the meeting. But if you can only get there virtually, do it if that's what you need to do, right? I mean, it is a great benefit of the pandemic for our world, I think. Um, so, do you find that you're sending more people to the online stuff?
Yes, and all the work that I do, all the coaching, coaching has always been something that I did by phone even before video platforms. And but I've gone everything that I do by telehealth, and I'm frankly never going back to an office because I think it's more accessible and it's certainly easier for me. And
Yeah, yeah, right. I mean, I do all my therapy virtual now. Well, not all. There's a woman that I see. We meet in person. I like seeing her in person, and we have a nice time, talking in a small room. It is totally not, socially distant, but for my day to day therapy, it is virtual now, and my therapist said I don't want to go back. It's like there's so much more. She could probably see more patients. I'm guessing that way, right? It's probably just a better throughput. Um, yeah, a lot of benefits from a pretty challenging situation for everybody. Made Zoom we're talking on Zoom. I didn't know about Zoom
right.
beforehand. I never did video conferencing. It was painful. Um, I was going to ask you something about Portland. Oh, so you're in Portland. So I come to Portland a lot because I do enjoy, well, one, I enjoy just the area. We started coming up there 20 years ago, more now. I'm losing sense of time. A long time ago, we came up to Freeport to camp, me and my wife. It was like one of our first trips. We didn't have a lot of money, so we went camping. And we kind of fell in love with Maine, and we've been coming back multiple times a year since. But Portland itself has become quite a food destination. And one thing that you do have is like access to really, and I don't know if people like from around the country, I'm kind of looking at where people are listening. There's people, kind of spread diverse. Like Portland is a pretty hip city with really good food and really good access to groceries, like good groceries. Like you guys have good grocery stores, better than I have around me in Jersey. Has that been helpful to you?
Helpful in terms of the food addiction, having
Yeah,
access.
like access to good food, right? Because I don't know that it's always been that way up there, right? Like, so there's been a change, and now you have this more sort of natural kind of access, I think.
I think that what's been most helpful for me in my recovery around food is keeping food really simple.
Okay.
So I'm less of a foodie now than I've ever been.
Hmm.
And the fact that Portland, Maine has more restaurants per capita than San Francisco is just mind blowing to me. And I have a son who's in his mid 20s, and I love what's happening in Portland for him. He now owns a house out in North Yarmouth, so it's not that far, but it's not in the city
Mm-hmm.
either. And um, I love seeing Portland grow. I know a lot of people that are, I'm from Connecticut originally, so I'm not a Mainer.
Mm-hmm.
And even though my son was born here, I often say that you have to go 3 generations back to be truly considered a Mainer. But I love seeing what's happening for property values, for the culture of our city. I've done a lot of traveling, and whenever I come back, I feel so grateful to live here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is I always say when we go over the bridge, I kind of feel at home up there. It is an amazing sort of community, and I feel that way from, as soon as we cross over in Kittery up quite a bit too. Like I feel pretty good. There is a break point where we go up a little bit and then I feel a little bit like, maybe this is too Maine for me. Like they probably know I'm not from around here.
Go up to the Forks or Lubec or
Yeah,
something.
like when you get way up, you definitely stand out a little bit. But there is just so much, you know, so much that I see up there that I wish I could take with me back to like New Jersey. There's a lot of, there's services in Portland that I think are really good for people who are struggling. You see that kind of baked into the community. I know some people have different feelings about that. I think it's spectacular. Um, and the arts are great and the education seems really strong throughout the area, so I think there's just a lot going on up there. um, the other thing I wanted to ask you about is your podcast. So
Yeah,
you have a podcast. Can you tell everybody about your podcast so that they'll have two podcasts to listen to at least?
I'd love to. And then I have a question about yours.
Sure.
So the title of my podcast is Liars, Thieves, Gluttons, and Whores. And that is a description from some AA literature about addicts and alcoholics tend to be liars, thieves, gluttons, and whores. So I knew when the thought of that title came to my mind that it would draw the people that have heard it in the AA and 12-step culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew it would be an instant draw. Then I woke up one morning with that sound from the Wizard of Oz about um, lions, tigers, and bears. Oh my! And and I started to say in my own mind, liars, thieves, gluttons, and whores. Oh my! And so I, the same day, contacted a singer songwriter that I've worked with, Lori Jones, and she happens to be the guest host of this second season of Liars, Thieves, Gluttons, and Whores. And she and her son put together the intro with some of her background music, and they did the voiceovers, being like Dorothy from the Wizard of Oz, saying, will we hear stories of addiction? And I just love it. And I have, so years back, I did a radio show that was over the internet with Women in Power Radio.
Mm-hmm.
And my show was the title of my coaching business, which is You Can Do Coaching. And so it was You Can Do Radio. And I did that for 2 years. And I did interviews every week. And I never got it together to do batch interviewing
Okay.
at the time. So I was always like, oh my God, who do I get to interview this week?
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't called podcasting then. It's the same thing. Only one difference was that because we were part of the Women of Power network, I got to just put up my recording of the show, and they had a producer that put the intro to it. And, so now doing podcasting, I've had a lot to learn to do that myself and to edit in Audacity and put my show up on my, I still have a virtual assistant that does a lot of the scheduling and
Yeah.
launching the promo for the show. And we did merchandise this year.
Oh,
So
that's cool. That's
it
good.
really is exciting. I've always loved doing interviews with people. And then while producing the show, like before it actually aired, I decided to co-host it. It started out only most of the first season with my brother, and tragedy struck our family when his son, my nephew, died of an overdose to heroin cut with fentanyl. And I became another part of a statistic that I never wanted to be a part of. It's still crushing. And, that we just dedicated the whole show to David.
Yeah. 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 I'm really sorry to hear that.
Yeah, thank you. Like so many addicts, David was, one of my favorite relatives and just a brilliant guy, so funny, and did rap, even though it's, young white man. He was just a rapper and really talented at it, and funny. And everyone that got to know him loved him. Even, after he died, he worked for my brother, his dad, and they spent a lot of time together, and they were avid sport enthusiasts and went to all these basketball games together.
Mm-hmm.
And at the stadium, they reserved a seat for the season for my nephew in his name, because in memorial for him. That's like kind of, I don't know, it's just bizarre. It was totally unexpected to my brother to have that kind of honor. And
Yeah. Fentanyl is a real problem. Something that we are seeing more and more of in our area. Not only in heroin, but across other drugs now too. And it's very nerve-wracking. One, as somebody in our field; two, as a parent, and not that my children are using drugs, but like different friends, people they know. It's so close to those types of incidents. Just more and more, I think we're seeing them, and I just don't know what the solution is. Obviously continuing to talk like we do helps, bring, acknowledgement to the issues, and then also the solutions. We're sort of saying, okay, here's a path if you want to choose to try it. Reach out to Nancy, reach out to Corey, reach out to Bob, or whomever, or these local organizations, and you can find help. And I think some people are doing that. We are, in my organization, we're talking a lot about how to reach younger people, because that seems to be a real issue right now.
and Lori and I were talking about, the people who are sober curious
Mm-hmm.
that haven't gotten to that place where they're losing, jobs and relationships and in crisis, but they're just saying, I wonder if life would be better if I wasn't using.
Yeah, I think in my recovery coach training, we talked about that, and it was like that, we called it like contemplation stage. So
Mm-hmm.
like, it's like, yeah, we're kind of contemplating, we might have an issue, so it's like, it's spinning around in their head. I think now that we've put like a term to it that like people not in our business can kind of relate to, it's like, it's a good thing. And there's this movement online, and there's hashtags on Instagram, and there's this rise of the NA drinks, which I know some people don't love. I myself have never been able to drink a NA beer. I just don't like it. I do drink hop water, but like that's just hops and water, so it's not for everybody. And I make my own, so it doesn't taste like the stuff that they sell at the store. It's just like bitter. It's like bitter water. I mean, it's very unappealing to most people. But I think it's a good thing for the sober curious movement to have more stuff.
Well,
Um,
I have a question for you,
sure.
Corey, about the title of your podcast, Sober by Design.
Yeah. I,
Come up with that? I really love it for myself, but
yeah.
I want
It
to know.
just so I'm thinking it was well, it came out of my Instagram account. So I have like a personal Instagram account that I run, just sober by design, and that became a big part of my recovery. I'd say 5 years ago. Just sort of that online presence, and I had kind of come up through the internet, message boards, and really created a lot of good relationships online through the internet. And then Instagram just was the next iteration of it. Um, and when I wanted to make an account, I went to school I started out in school for architecture. I think, as I mentioned, I had some problems with alcohol pretty early on. That kind of blew up in my face quickly. I ended up with a bachelor's in industrial design. And, I now do work in design and construction. So, I have a big love for design in general, but really um, my love is like architecture. So, I'm looking next to me at my desk. I have my Frank Lloyd Wright books, my Rem Koolhaas books, houses, just books on random churches. So I've always had this thing for design, and I thought, okay, I'm literally sober by design. Like, I designed how I did this a little bit. I mean, there was some work, but it wasn't just by pure chance. Like, and I think more so now, my recovery, I'm very intentional about it. So, this podcast is part of it, right? So, like, I've had these steps. It was AA, then it was podcasts where I was listening, books, then a little bit of the online world, recovery coaching, and now this is like the next thing for me. Having really interesting conversations with people like yourself, and kind of learning more about what people are doing just in their world in recovery, it more in depth. Like, I can glean a little bit from my Instagram feed, but not enough. And I think that this podcast is just for me. If other people are listening, I think that's awesome. But really, these interviews are for me to learn more about you, and then the next person and the next person. And some of these people are not going to be in recovery either. Like, I think that those people are just as interesting sometimes, for me, in my personal story. So it just kind of started out as a play on just my love of design, and it's kind of gone from there.
Right.
I hope that made sense.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
very much so.
yeah. Um, so while I'm not an artist, I have not created any major artistic works of building. I do still work in that field. Um, so a couple of things that I like to leave with, really just, you know, two main things. The first is always, you said you like to stream Netflix shows, so now I'm interested. I love leaving people with ideas of like things that my guests are watching, listening to, reading. So do you have any recommendations?
Oh golly. No.
No.
I'm just laughing because the last thing I watched on Netflix was the Mindy Project, like 6 seasons of the Mindy Project.
That's okay. I,
Um, it was just when I'm looking for escapism, it's pure entertainment. I'm not looking for things of value to watch
mm-hmm.
at that time. In fact, when Roe versus Wade was overturned, I listened to all comedy. Comedians in cars was what I listened to.
Sure.
I had to. I just needed to escape the feeling of sinking into a well that I couldn't get out of, and I listened to several books. Martin Short is like my favorite comedian, and I listened to the book that he did on with his own voice
Mm-hmm.
on Audible. And Steve Martin was another favorite of mine. So,
His book?
yes,
Yeah, because he
yeah,
had that book that he released. It was a little while ago now, but it was,
yeah.
yeah.
I think it's called Stand Up or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
And so anyway, that those I have no recommendations in terms of books to turn to that for recovery.
No, no, I don't even want that. I like the ones that
Oh,
you
okay.
gave.
He's just looking for
Comedians in Cars is great. For people who haven't seen it, it is. I don't watch it a ton. I've seen a couple, but that's
yeah.
great escapism TV. And I think it's just interesting for people to hear stuff, and the Steve Martin book, Martin Short book, all that kind of stuff. I think is really good. Because my recommendations are never about recovery stuff. So mine today is going to be the complete opposite, unfortunately. And I just started it, but I could tell it's a good show. So my wife and I watched, I don't even know the name of it, but it was on HBO. It was like a zombie show. I think it was like The Rest of Us or something like that. But there's this guy that's on there. That his name I don't even know. Uh, Somebody will tell me. But he is in that show. Then he's in The Mandalorian, which is a Disney Star Wars show. But he's in this show that I started on Netflix, Narcos, and it's about Pablo Escobar and the cocaine trade out of Colombia, and it's very historically accurate. And I've watched documentaries on that in the past. Um, it's quite for people who don't understand how bad Miami was in the '80s. It is quite a eye opener. Um, the amount of murder that happened in Miami, and to have gone down there in the past 20 years and seen what it is now, it's like it's crazy. So I like watching shows like that kind of give me an idea of like something from the past. So I'm gonna say Narcos, despite it being fully about drug trade. I'm taking it more as a historical, fiction type show where you're learning something, um, because it is really interesting to know the history of the country. Because if that was happening today, people would be losing their mind with the amount of people that were, you know what I mean? Like they were saying that they had to rent like cooler trucks for the amount of people that were being murdered daily. I mean, it's mind boggling, like that was happening. So anyway, and then they talk about like Reagan and the war on drugs, and so I think it's an interesting show. So that's my recommendation for the week is Narcos. Hopefully, I come up with something better next week. I don't have any books this week. I can't read that much. I'm still stuck on a book about it's Patton Oswalt's wife. She wrote a book on the Golden State Killer, and then she died. So Michelle McNamara had written it mostly, and then she didn't finish it, and she passed away. So it's like her work interspersed with like her editor's work, and I think Patton Oswalt might have put some in there as well. So it goes through the story of how she really dove into this investigation. So it's a very detailed crime novel, which I also enjoy reading. So
Mentioned two things that I will not do. Reading a crime novel or true life thriller, or watching those type of series on television right before I go to bed.
yeah,
I have an very active, avid dream life, and it just influences it too much in a negative way
I
that I'm
I
like,
can
I'm
just shut that
waking up at
down
night. Yeah,
somehow. I don't know why, but I can read it and then it just kind of shuts off. But I do find those books very interesting, and especially when they can go through and kind of highlight, oh, this is where we messed up. If they're very clear and honest, I think it's a very interesting read.
a book I am reading that I would love to let people know about is the biography of Edward Gorey,
Okay.
who was an artist that I loved. He did a lot of very dark humor in black and white illustration. And to give you one example, I was brought up, my mom loved Edward Gorey, and we were brought up on one of his alphabet books called The Ghastly Crumb Tinies, where B is for Basil, who got eaten by bears, and C is for Clara, who fell down the stairs. Like really dark humor. So the biography is titled Born to be Posthumous,
Okay.
which I just love. So
Well, I will, as always, put all these links into the show notes so people can go check it out on Amazon, and then pick it up if they want.
great.
Um, the last thing I'm just going to ask, is there anything that you want to leave, the listeners with, a tool that you've used in your recovery that's helpful, sort of a quick hit kind of takeaway?
Yeah, I think the quick hit that I'd like to send people away with is, if it's a problem for you, it's a problem. It doesn't have to be a problem for anybody else. And just to explore those, sober curious hashtags, reach out for help, know that there's a slogan from AA that you don't have to do it alone. You alone have to do it, but you don't have to do it alone. Like, you're the only one that can start this journey,
Yeah.
but you don't have to do it alone. And you really are not alone.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are great, quick takeaways, Nancy. I appreciate those too. Well, thank you for taking time out of your day to talk to me. I really appreciate it. I know this is early on in my podcast, so I'm getting critiques and some feedback and trying to make it a little bit more dialed in. And again, thanks for being on the early ones here.
You're welcome.
All
My
right.
pleasure.
All right, Nancy, we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a great day.
Bye bye.